Okay, this is a series of videos on how Bryan Kohberger was caught in the Moscow 4 case in Idaho. And we have access to the redacted documents. There's a lot of these documents that were released, and there's going to be more. And we'll have more videos that talk about the investigation process. And this specific video is going to be really more centered on the knife and the sheath and just the investigation that went into the knife, and we'll cover other videos with other aspects of the investigation. But you're looking at the documents here, and I want to start with this narrative here, which was this was just basically one of the officers there, John Rosinski. He responded to the scene and he learned that there was a sheath that was found inside the apartment the following day, which was on November 14th, 2022. And this is where the tan sheath was located. This is the Marine Corps Eagle, Globe, and Anchor symbol that was on the sheath. And this person started following up with different businesses to find out if they sold that particular K-bar. So they went to, Tri-State Outfitters, Big Five Sporting Goods, Moscow Building Supply, Spence Hardware, and Walmart. Those particular stores apparently didn't sell the K-bar brand. But this was also when they were in Walmart, and one of the staff members approached him and mentioned that a white male was looking for a black ski mask that covered his face. And they advised him that they only had the camo face masks and that he left. So that's where that part of the investigation came in. I know a lot of people heard about that. This part of the documents, there was a person that was actually interviewed because they sustained an injury to their right hand the day of the crime. So this was on November 13th, 2022. And they were interviewed, and apparently they were intoxicated. They were trying to cut a chicken sandwich, and they needed medical care for a cut on their hand. And this brings up a good point because, again, with knife attacks, it is very common for someone to become injured, the suspect to actually become injured, from the slippage. When we're talking about blood and sweat and just the closeness of such an attack, very common for possible DNA transfer, blood evidence from the suspect, and that's led to many arrests. Just as a side note, these are some of the things that investigators looked at. They looked at so many different elements and they responded to so many different tips, and this was one of the tips there with this person who cut their hand. They're looking at all avenues, and this didn't turn out to be related to the case, but they still did their due diligence, taking photographs of the injuries and putting this into evidence essentially, and just storing it just in case it became relevant. There's another interesting element here. You can see they start applying for search warrants. Law enforcement's applying to all sorts of different businesses, which you'll see later here. But this one in particular was eBay, and they're trying to find this K-bar knife, this leather sheath. They have a system. It's called the eBay Law Enforcement e-request system, and they can get in. They can find these IDs, these user IDs. They can see purchases, by state, and they start applying for warrants. I mean, they're looking for absolutely everything with this purchase. So just to give you an idea of some of the things that they're requesting in the warrant, specifically, they're looking for purchases before or after November 13th, 2022, and they want everything: the user ID, subscriber information, which includes their contact info, their billing information, when the account was opened, when it closed. They're looking for the history of all the transactions and even affiliated storefronts, which I thought was interesting. The payment information that was made. So a lot of information in these documents that they're trying to get a hold of. In the documents, this is where, they're talking about some pretty horrific injuries, a lot of blood, a lot of stab wounds. And this is where they really noticed the tan leather sheath that was laying on the bed next to Maddie, right? And they quickly collected this evidence and brought it to forensics and tested for it. So they did not mess around with this. They knew this was potentially critical evidence. The Idaho State Police was a big help in this process. Okay, you're seeing more documents for warrants. This is for Walmart. They're trying to find purchases from January 1st, 2022 to the present time, and they are utilizing a forensic accountant to help in this process to get this information. Okay, and then Amazon's warrant. This was the big one here because this is where Bryan Kohberger had purchased the K-bar and the Sheath. So they're on November 26, 2022, they applied for the warrant. And then this was interesting too, because there's narratives in here about the transportation of the DNA that was found on the Sheath. So again, it was found on the button snap of the Sheath, and this was touch DNA. So they had this profile that was developed from the DNA, and they transported it to their partner, which was Othram right here in Houston, Texas. So one of the individuals that was part of this case, they actually flew out to this lab, and they're documenting in here that they even had to go through TSA security, and they're seeing that the DNA sample was not removed from the box, and it was still in the backpack, and it still stayed in their possession. I mean, they're really trying to document that it stayed with them. It didn't leave their presence. Nobody took it out. And that's really important because when you're traveling with evidence and whoever's taking possession of that, this is where holes can occur and where defense attorneys can really take advantage of this process, because if there's a break in who's handling a certain item and somebody wasn't paying attention to it for a certain amount of time or period of time, they don't know if it's been contaminated or if something's happened with the item, or it's no longer valid because it wasn't in proper care. So they're documenting all of this to make sure that the court knows that, hey, this was secured, nothing happened to this DNA while it was transported to Houston. So that's what this is really talking about here. Is still properly sealed with evidence tape. All that stuff's extremely important in the court process. Law enforcement received a lot of different tips, and a lot of these just didn't really pan out, but you can see all the avenues that they're really looking into. People who were, for example, this person was painting an apartment, and a knife blade was found in the gutter of a building, and the knife was called into law enforcement, and they would even collect these knives, but they would determine that it wasn't the type of knife that caused the injuries to the victims, but they'd still analyze it, collect it, they put it into evidence. And this happened multiple times. There were other K-bar knives found, and some of them would have the knife with like a black sheath, and so it didn't quite match up, or the knife wouldn't be the right type of knife that would cause the injuries. So that happened quite a bit with different tips pouring in that were found in these documents. And this was huge right here, because this is where with Amazon they found the packages that Bryan Kohberger had ordered from Amazon, and it was from the same account. And so you're looking at, on June 13th, 2023, there was a K-bar with the sheath, a K-bar sharpener, and a bottle of supplements, which were vegan supplements that were purchased from that same account. So they're getting warrants for all that information. And what's interesting is they actually purchased the same type of knife. And I'll show you here in just a minute in those documents why they did that. So on June 7th, 2023, the chief medical examiner and even Bill Thompson, the prosecutor, they had some other law enforcement personnel, evidence technicians. They came out to meet up and actually look at these injuries, and they had the exact type of knife. And so they actually took the same type of knife out of a box and compared that K-bar with the injuries. And they found that the K-bar knife was consistent as being the weapon that could have caused the injuries to all 4 of the victims. And I won't go into too much detail on this because it's pretty graphic, but they basically were able to look at the both sides of the knife and seeing that there's, the tip of the knife, the depth, either side of the knife, the type of wound that would have created on either end, and those types of wounds were matching with the victim. So it's consistent with that K-bar knife. And that was just another piece of the puzzle that they were able to document. And again, same knife that Bryan Kohberger purchased. They found these return receipts in his Hyundai Elantra that was connected with that Amazon account. So that was just another piece of the puzzle. All these things led to his arrest. And that is some of the evidence that was found in the documents surrounding the knife and the sheath. And so in other videos, we'll talk about other investigative elements that were conducted, but there's so many documents that I had to pick a specific component because we're looking at 578 different documents here to focus on. And if you have any questions or comments or directions I should follow with these documents as well, comment below. And I appreciate a like and a follow on the channel as I get this going again, since I have not been as active in the past with it. But we'll be back with another video. Y'all take care.